With you. My God, we thank you for a new week that we can study as we look at the story of Abraham. May we remember your promise of love towards us no matter what. Amen. I have one slight little update because as I was making this, I decided to chop off 2 chapters and throw it into next week. So, if you read chapters 24 and 25, congrats. You are extra ready for next week. But we are going to stop when Sarah dies today. And so we're going to see a little bit of Isaac being born, but we're going to wait for Isaac as an adult to kind of fade into next week's story. So if you see it ending at 23, that's intentional. We'll cover the rest next week. As always, you can find everything online. I'm going to update this extra material down at the bottom because we're going to watch 2 videos today, and one of them is not on here about what a covenant is, which is our theme for today, is about covenant. And so that'll be in there. This is what we've looked at so far. In Genesis chapter 1, God made a world, God made humanity. It was very good. God made men and women, and they are both given a vocation to spread the garden. And a garden is like a temple. It's where God reigns. The world is well ordered. We are supposed to spread that everywhere. In chapter 3, we saw that we grasped for something. We grasped for a new way of life, for some type of power from God that we don't have. We wanted to be like God's, and that broke everything. And so the rest of kind of Genesis shows these 2 ways of life. We saw that in chapter 4, the stories of Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, and we saw the end of Cain's line in Lamech with evil and destruction and this seeking of human greatness. But then we get replaced in this genealogy with a Seth. And Seth's line is going to be the line that God's going to work through. We learn about Enoch, who walks with God. Chapter 6 goes to Noah and the flood, and we're seeing more of this pollution of God's good creation. And so what happens in chapter 7, the world gets uncreated. And so it's a reversal of the creation that had been done. Chapter 8 is this really cool line. Remember, we talked about the flood story. All points to this one line. God remembers Noah. That does not mean God forgot Noah existed. God did not forget about the good creation. It means that word remember, God intervenes. The divine intervenes on our behalf. So that idea of God remembering and God acting, it's a really cool word. We see in chapter 9 that creation and our roles are restored. There's this covenant made with Noah. Chapter 10 was another genealogy. And then we ended 2 weeks ago with the story at Babel, the tower at Babel, which is this picture of Babylon, of people trying to build this tower to reach up to God. And God's like, and, scatters everyone. And we see, though, what God has been doing is not working. And so God is going to need to remember and intervene again. And that's Abraham, where God is going to make a new family that's going to end up blessing the whole world. And so that's where we have been thus far. And now we're going to watch the Bible Project video for part 2 of Genesis. So you have not seen this yet unless you went to the website and watched it.
The book of Genesis. In the first video, we saw how chapters 1 through 11 set up the basic storyline of the Bible. God has created all things, and he makes humans in his image to rule the world on his behalf. The humans choose sin and rebellion, and so the world spins out of control and violence and death, all leading up to the rebellion and scattering of the people in Babylon. And so the big question is, what is God going to do to rescue and redeem his world? Well, out of that scattering at Babylon, the author traces a genealogy of just one family that leads eventually to a man named Abram, later known as Abraham. And God's promise to Abraham at the beginning of chapter 12 opens up a whole new movement in the story. God calls Abraham to leave his home and go to the land of Canaan, which God says will become his one day. And in that land, God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to make his name great and to bless him. Now, these promises are connected back to earlier parts of the book. So Babylon had arrogantly tried to make a great name for itself, and that didn't go over very well. But God, in his generosity, is going to bestow a great name on this no-name guy, Abraham. And God's blessing of Abraham echoes all the way back to that original blessing God gave humanity in the beginning. So the question is, why is God going to bless Abraham and his family? And the last line of God's promise makes this clear. So that all the families of the earth will find God's blessing in you. Now this is key for understanding the whole rest of the biblical story. God's plan is to rescue and bless his rebellious world through Abraham's family. And this is why the whole rest of the Old Testament story is just going to focus on this one family, eventually called the people of Israel. This is also why Israel will later be called a kingdom of priests at Mount Sinai. God wants to use them to show all of the other nations what he's like. And ultimately, this is the promise that gets picked up by the later biblical prophets and poets who say that its fulfillment will come through Israel's messianic king, whose reign will bring justice and peace to all of the nations. Now, at this point of the story, none of that's clear. You just have to keep reading and watch the promise develop. And so the rest of the book focuses on Abraham and his family. First, Abraham himself, then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then Jacob's 12 sons. And the stories about each generation, they're united by two main themes. So first, each generation of Abraham's family is marked by repeated failure. They just keep making really bad decisions that mess up their lives and that put God's promise in jeopardy. However, God remains faithful to them. He keeps rescuing them from themselves and reaffirming his commitment to bless them and bless the nations through them despite their failings. So the Abraham stories. God had promised Abraham a huge family, but on two different occasions, he's afraid for his life because other men are attracted to his wife, and so he denies that he's even married to her, which creates, of course, all of these problems. And not only that, Abraham and his wife Sarah, they can't have children, and so Sarah arranges for Abraham to sleep with one of their servant girls, which also creates all of these problems in the family. But each time, God bails Abraham out. And in chapters 15 and 17, God even formalizes his promise to Abraham with an official commitment called a covenant. This is a classic scene. God invites Abraham to look up at the night stars and to count them. And he says, that's how numerous your family is going to be. And despite all of the odds, having no kids and no way to have any at the moment, Abraham looks up in the sky and simply trusts God's promise. And God responds by entering into a covenant with Abraham, promising that he will become a father of many nations, that God's blessing may come to the whole world. God asked Abraham to mark his family with a sign of the covenant, circumcision of all the male boys in the family. This is a symbol to remind them that the fruitfulness of their family is a gift from God. And so Abraham has lots of kids eventually, and he dies at a good old age. Now, the Jacob stories play out these themes even more dramatically. From birth, Jacob lives up to the meaning of his name, which is deceiver. He cheats his brother Esau out of his inheritance and blessing, and he does it by deceiving his old blind father, no less, and then he just takes off. He goes on to take 4 wives, even though he really only loves one, Rachel, and this creates all of these rivalries in the family. The only thing that humbles Jacob is being deceived by his uncle Laban, who cheats him out of years of his life. The tables have finally turned. And so it's a humbled Jacob that returns to his homeland. And in a very strange story, Jacob ends up wrestling with God as he demands that God bless him. Some things never really change, do they? However, God honors his determination, and he passes Abraham's blessing on to him. And he renames Jacob as Israel, which means wrestles with God. Now, it's this last part of the book, the story of Jacob's sons, where all the themes come to a head. Jacob loves his second to youngest son, Joseph, more than any of the others, and he gives him this special jacket. And the 10 older sons come to hate Joseph, and so they kidnap him, and they plan to kill him, but instead they decide to just sell him into slavery in Egypt, where he ends up in prison. Talk about family failure. But God is with Joseph. And he orchestrates Joseph's release from prison, and Pharaoh ends up elevating Joseph to second in command over all of Egypt. And so Joseph saves the nation of Egypt during a famine. And he also ends up saving his brothers and his family from starving to death. And so once again, we can see the folly and the sin of Abraham's family is met with God's faithfulness, who subverts even the evil of the brothers into an occasion to save life. And this is actually what Joseph says right near the end of the book. He says to his brothers, "You all planned this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save many lives." Now, these words are strategically placed at the end of the book because they summarize not only the story of Joseph and his brothers, but the book as a whole. From Genesis 3 onward, humans keep acting selfishly and doing evil, but this God is not going to leave his world to its own devices. He remains faithful and determined to bless people despite their failures. You can see this especially in how that mysterious promise about the descendant of the woman gets developed throughout the book. So remember, Genesis 3, God promised that this wounded victor would come and crush the snake and defeat evil at its source. And the author then connects this promise directly to the line of Abraham. This is a part of how God's going to bring his blessing to the nations. Now from Abraham, this promise gets connected to Judah, the fourth son of Jacob. And this is how. In an extremely important poem in chapter 49, in aging Jacob, he's on his deathbed, he wants to bless his 12 sons. And when he comes to Judah, Jacob predicts that Judah will become the tribe of Israel's royal leaders, and that one day a king will come who will command the obedience of all the nations and fulfill God's promise to restore the garden blessing to all of the world. And then after this, Jacob dies. And later, Joseph dies too. And the growing family remains in Egypt. And so the book of Genesis ends with all of these future hopes and promises left hanging and undeveloped. And it forces you to turn the page to see how it's all going to turn out. But for now, that's the book of Genesis.
Pretty cool, right? Now, today we're just going to talk about most of Abraham's story. So a few important parts I want you to see, and we are going to come back to this slide throughout. So I have space in your notes if you want to write some of this part down. There is a big chiasm that takes place in Abraham's story. And for me, the center of that chiasm is walking with God by faith in covenant. And it's chapters 15 through 17. That, for me, is the main part of the story of Abraham. Walking with God by faith in covenant. I'm going to change slides, but that line is still going to be there, okay? This is a picture of that, okay? So here's the middle. Walking with God by faith in covenant. And that's kind of our theme for today. It's right there. It's about covenant, God's promise to us, faithfulness. It's going to begin and end with genealogies. We looked at some of those genealogies last time. We are going to mention the genealogy that's in there today. I have a family tree I'm going to hand out. Not all of you have it yet. There is these promises made by God to Abraham. And we're going to see another theme with Abraham of a testing of Abraham's faith. And so hold on to this because it's beginning and ending with this testing of Abraham's faith. And Abraham is faithful in those moments. Then there is a show of Abraham's failure. And I like the way this words it, the sister fib, part 1 and part 2. We're going to see that with him lying and deceiving about Sarah being his wife. Then that's going to be mirrored with a failure of others. This is happening when he rescues Lot, which is going to happen twice. And there's this big scene, you'll remember this, where he's at Sodom and Gomorrah, and just weird stuff happens. And I made a new joke. Every time that you see Lot, it's just a lot. And so just take a deep breath when you see Lot's name go, oh no, here we go again. But this is the center, walking by God with faith in covenant. Now, some scholars point to another middle of that chiasm, and they're going to focus on the Hagar-Ishmael story as being the main point. For me, the main point is about the covenant, but people smarter than me And you can see it already. It's 15 and 16, but chapter 16 is there in the middle. That's the part with Hagar and Ishmael. We are also going to see a big display of the character of God in being very merciful, being rich and out. And we're going to learn a new name for God, the God who sees me. Beautiful phrase, the God who sees me, the God who hears me. I mean, I love it. It's a good one to write down. For me, though, here, walking by God with faith in covenant, there's 2 covenants. Here we are back on this. We're going to look at some maps, some timelines, some family trees. Unfortunately, when I was printing this handout, the printer messed up. It was not me. I printed this all at once, and some of them are front and back, and others are not. And so I don't know what's up with that. There is a map here of where Abraham is on his journeys, and there's also a shortened family tree that I think is nice to look at. It is occurring to me now that I may have printed 60 of these and not 30. And I did at first click print, and I thought I canceled it because then I did it 2-sided, so maybe it was me. But we're going to pretend it wasn't. Here's a map of where we are at the beginning. This is Mesopotamia. Okay? Notice here that we're near Babylon in Assyria. Genesis is written when most of the people are in exile or coming out of exile. They live here and they're journeying to the promised land. It mirrors the story that Abraham's going to take the journey that the listeners of this story, the receivers of this story, when it gets written down, are going through. But this is where we start out. They would have been familiar with these.
Where is Ur? You are.
Ur's down here. So here's Babylon. This is modern day Iran.
Oh.
I think it's bordering near. It's Iran.
Oh, I see.
It is number 1. You will see another one here of all of these back and forth places. Now, if this class had time to spend 3 weeks on Abraham's story, I would tell you about all the magic and the cool that happens of all of these places because they're cool, like Hebron and Shechem and stuff. But you have this with you, and you can look that up now when you can't sleep at night. But I want you to know this. A lot of these towns, they were already big, known Canaanite towns. And what we're going to see when we go through it, and throughout the book of Genesis, they get new names. And these would have been places that might have worshipped these Canaanite deities. If you read in the Old Testament, these high places, these kind of pollutions of pure worship, and they get claimed by Abraham's God. And they get new names like Hagar's story, the God who sees me, or the everlasting God, or the God of oaths, or these other ones. So some of these names are going to pop up when Abraham's going to go there, build an altar, and things like that. So that is some of this map. And here's a timeline, and I'm not going to show you this timeline again. I just want to show you how long this takes place. Because remember, this was written for a people in exile. They said, God, you promised me something would happen. And I'm waiting for that thing to happen. And Abraham's story reflects that. It's a story of patience and waiting for God to bring something up. I want to just point that out so you know that. We will look at this map next week and the week after. It shows Isaac and Jacob. And just notice that there's lots of movement and back and forth in all of these places. So sometimes these names like Hebron, Shechem again, Bethel, Kadesh, they're towns we're going to visit. And even today, they are still holy sites in Israel. I mentioned this already. This is about waiting. It's written for a people coming out of exile. And there's 3 covenants to hold on to. Genesis 12, and for me, Genesis 12 is the whole point of Genesis with the calling of Abraham. God calls Abraham, and God gives Abraham a promise, which to me sounds a whole lot like a covenant. And so I'm calling it the covenant of calling. There's a second covenant that I'm calling the covenant of cutting because I wanted this to have C's. But if you're writing your notes, put a slash and put covenant of pieces, because that's really what this one's called. I just wanted it to have another C. And then there's the covenant of circumcision. This is the covenant that happens in chapter 15. And we don't know this story. It's when God cuts all these animals in half and has a weird dream, and this stuff happens with a pot is on fire and it's floating in the air and stuff. And we talk about the circumcision, but that's just a sign of the covenant that happens in 15. So I want you to remember chapter 15. And then there's these 3 human failures. We already mentioned the sister-wife kind of fib. There's the Hagar-Ishmael stuff going on. And then there's Sodom and Gomorrah, which you'll go, what the heck? And they are pictures of failures. So they should make you go, what? And I want you to see this family tree. I like this family tree here because it shows Abraham's dad, Terah, who you'll notice there are 2 other people. And there's this theme in Genesis of 3 sons. And so Abraham comes from 3 sons. And the only thing you need to know from this extended family tree, Lot and Sarah are related to Abraham. That they are cousins. They come from the same family group. And so I have that sort of reflected. But for our purposes in this class, that family tree that's just Abraham's kids is sufficient for what we're going to have. Okay, yeah.
This covenant business is so personal to Abraham and I guess the Israelites. It just never meant anything to me because it didn't relate to covenant with anybody else.
Oh, I believe it does.
But that's what I want to find out. What's the take home with that? Because
we will play a video on covenant. It's 5 minutes long, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But for me, this covenant to Abraham is the same covenant to us. It's fulfilled in us. It's fulfilled through Jesus, and through Jesus brings us into it.
What about the poor Canaanites? I mean, they didn't have any covenants. They didn't have any peace.
We're going to talk about that when we get to Melchizedek.
Yeah.
Okay. We will touch on what you're asking.
Yeah. Like nobody else counts but Abraham. They just seem to.
This is just one story and one way of God working.
Yeah, preferential treatment, I guess, is what it always bothered me. Yeah.
That's probably true. We all write from our own perspectives.
Yeah.
Let's go to chapter 12, though. So Abraham is called. He is called to leave from a known land to an unknown land. And so there's a 3-part promise. You're leaving this land that you know. You are leaving your family and all the stuff you have. But I will give you a new home. You'll have a new land. I will give you a new family. You're going to have lots of kids and descendants, and you will be blessed. And I love the way that the blessing is worded. And this, for me, is the point of Genesis and the point of covenants and where we matter for it and the rest of the world. God says, I will bless you, not just with riches and kids and stuff like that, but you will be a blessing, and all of the world will be blessed through you. For me, this is so crucial to Genesis that on our poster for the summary, this is the verse that I put. This is what Genesis is about. It's about God making a family, making a people that will become the blessing for the whole world. When we have Eucharist on Sundays, when we have communion, you may sometimes see it in your bulletin. It says the word Eucharist means to become thanksgiving. It is not just to be thankful. Same thing here. This isn't just being blessed. It's to become the blessing. It's to become the thanksgiving. It's this sacramental way. He becomes the blessing itself, and his line becomes the blessing itself. And that line is us. We are supposed to be the blessing to the world. That is this call of Abraham. Here is this call of Abraham. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, from your kindred, and your father's house. Notice it happens in threes. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Great verse. Get it on a t-shirt. But remember, you are the blessing of God to the world. Really cool. That covenant begins with Abraham. It continues in you. We will talk more about covenants as we get there. Now, after Abraham is called, he's in the land of Canaan, but famine strikes. And so the story of Abraham is going to have lots of ups and downs. Now, notice that this story might sound familiar to you. Abraham ends up in Egypt. He meets Pharaoh. He brings his wife Sarah with him. And apparently Sarah is a really beautiful woman. And Abraham's like, oh, I don't want them to see you being beautiful and kill me because I'm a foreigner. And it seems like at this point he doesn't have a lot of power or riches or things like that. And so he lies, says that they are brother and sister, which is kind of true. And then all of Egypt is struck with plagues. And then the Pharaoh's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? They let him go. And then Abraham leaves even richer, leaves with the riches of Egypt. Sound familiar? Yes, it's a mini Exodus. This sort of little story is going to take place 3 times in Genesis. There's this time with Abraham and Sarah in Egypt with Pharaoh here in chapter 12. It's going to happen again with Abraham and Sarah in this Philistine city of Gerar and with King Abimelech. And then it's going to happen again with Abimelech with Isaac and Rebekah. And so kind of interesting how that happens. The story of Abraham here is getting connected to Exodus, to the story later with Moses and all of Israel.
Can you say more about this sister, half-sister?
Yeah, so on that family tree, they were cousin half-sisters. And there are places in the world where still today it is ideal that you marry your first cousin, that you marry within the family. Because the way inheritance works, it goes in the family. If you marry outside your family line, your inheritance gets split. So you have stronger familial bonds. You strengthen your family line the closer you marry into relation. To us, that sounds odd. You have more birth defects if you have a kid in your 40s than if you marry your first cousin and have a kid. It is not that weird. It is very normal for most of the population of the world still today. And so we see that happen with Abraham and with Sarah. It's sort of true that they are brother and sister, but it's a deception because he doesn't want to be killed. If they take his wife, he would have had to have been killed. And so he is using Sarah for his own benefit. And that is a thing you're not supposed to do. And he's not seeing positive. This is a failure on his part. Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And I did a lot of research about the genetics and birth defects and how normal that is when I first did this. And if you're interested, I can find those statistics for you. Okay, we're going to go through some of this chapters kind of quick because we're doing a lot. Chapter 13. Suddenly, and this seems very different from chapter 12, Abraham and his family is very rich. And so he has lots of silver, he has lots of gold, he has lots of livestock, and they have lots of personnel. And they are stopped in Shechem. And Abraham and Lot's herders, and now they're almost like functioning like a mini nation at this point, come into conflict over resources. And so the outcome of chapter 13 is that Lot is going to go east towards the cities of the plain, and I'll tell you about that in a second. And Abraham is going to go west and a little bit north towards Canaan, which at this point is undeveloped. It's hill country. It's not a good place to go agriculturally. Lot, if you remember our 2 ways of life, Lot goes toward the city, go towards wealth, go towards comfort, goes toward easiness. Abraham goes toward what's a little bit more difficult, but more nature-y kind of things. It's also a display of these 2 ways of life. What stands out in this chapter is Abraham's generosity. He was the oldest. He was the leader in this clan, this little tribe that is here. And he should have gotten the better lands. But he defaults and lets Lot have the first pick. And Lot is a little jerk and takes the good lands. He's also bad, and he goes towards the bad cities. And you're not supposed to do that. I'm being a little facetious in my explanations here. Here's where Shechem is. Here's where Hebron is. We're going to come here in a minute. But they are over here. Okay? He goes east towards these plain cities. Do you notice any of them there? Do you know what those are? Sodom and Gomorrah? They're not good places. And then Abraham is going to go west towards Canaan. That is a good place because it's the land God told him to go to. Any questions here or on chapter 13? Okay. Ooh, I love chapter 14. If you, I don't feel like anyone in here, if you like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or other big war movies of big battles and stuff, Master and Commander, I don't know, things like that, you will love this chapter. It's so cool. I like to call it the War of the Nine Kings. I like Game of Thrones, but there's a big thing there called the War of the Five Kings, and to me it kind of sounds like that. There is a Western alliance of kings from Canaan, and they come into battle with an Eastern alliance of kings from Mesopotamia. That Eastern alliance is going to represent Babylon, Assyria, okay? It's the big bad countries that Israel has just come out of exile from. And they are put under subjugation for 12 years, which again is going to sound very familiar to this people to whom it's written to. I want to make a note of all Abraham's gone for. Abraham, I'm going to bless you. All these great things are going to happen. You're going to have lots of kids. Famine. Ends up in Egypt. Plagues. Now war for 12 years. It's already beginning hard. And it's this waiting game again that we're going to see. We're seeing this perseverance happening with Abraham. Abraham is going to single-handedly defeat the entire Mesopotamian world with 300 privately trained men that just pop up. He didn't have them in Egypt, I guess, but they're here now. And this is going to show God's favor towards Abraham. It's also going to show God's favor towards Israel over Mesopotamia. It's a kind of a trump card for them. Here's a picture of it. You might be familiar with Shinar or Golim. These are big city-states here in Mesopotamia. They're older words for Babylon, Assyria, and stuff like that. And then over here, that Western Alliance, you'll know Sodom and Gomorrah. The other ones are just other Canaanite city-states. And this war happens. It's so cool. It's cool. It's kind of cool to read if you're into that. So I just put a summary picture because we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But they all join up and they plow through here and they split and divide and go through all the way to the Negev. The Negev is the southern desert. It's the wilderness down here. It just means the south. And they come up, and as they're coming through here, and Abraham's over here near Hebron, Abraham's like, And Abraham goes after all of them because when they passed through here, they got Lot, who was living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, hey, that's my family. And so he goes and he defeats all of them and he kicks them out, and they go back. Here's a zoomed in picture of some of these cities where they may have been here around the Dead Sea. It's possible the Dead Sea was a lot bigger in ancient times, and over history it has continued to shrink. It has a limited water source, and as you know about the Dead Sea, it has salt water coming in, but there's no out. And so the salt concentration gets higher and higher. And when that evaporates, it leaves salt deposits back, which, hold on to that. But it leaves some of these other places down here. And there's weird, like this you show here, the brimstone deposits. There's weird rock formations and stuff that get left over, like we call them pillars of salt. Okay, so I have a picture of that. But that's what's going on over here. And it looks like a death place. There's not life there. It looks like a place that fire and brimstone rained down on because nothing can live there. That's what happens in the beginning of chapter 14. Just note that this War of the Five Kings happens. It's a big deal. It's really fun. But that's not what we're going to focus on. We're going to slow down and talk about Melchizedek. And this is going to come, Natalie, to some of the things that you brought about. Melchizedek's name means my name is righteousness. I'm just going to say this. This is a weird story. Melchizedek is this big monumental moment that pops up here for like a paragraph, goes away. He pops up a couple times in the Psalms. He's referenced in some of the New Testament. And you're just like, what's going on there with Melchizedek? And we're going to talk about it a little bit. Susan, could you read this?
King Melchizedek of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, El Elyon. He blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram, thy God Most High, El Elyon, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything.
So, suddenly this little guy comes up. This sound familiar? Anything? This bread and wine and a priest? If you had to guess if this was priestly or non-priestly, what would you guess? Priestly, yeah. There's some priestly rituals here, like the bread and the wine. A named priest. 1/10 of everything. That tithing is a priestly practice. You do that in a church. Melchizedek is the king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, is what it is. Jerusalem does not get conquered until David. It was a Jebusite stronghold. He is a priest of El Elyon, which is God Most High, and he's bringing bread and wine. Psalm 110 is even going to describe David as a priest in the order of Melchizedek, which is different than the Aaronic priestly class, which is the priest that served in the temple. And for me, this story is going to connect Abram to the Second Temple Judaism. It's going to get them used to practices like tithing. Yeah.
Is Melchizedek a real person? Seems like he didn't have a beginning, or he wasn't.
So there are a couple ways of looking at him, and we'll have that here on this next slide. For some people, Melchizedek is this pre-incarnate Christ, where he is, like you said, this figure that just seems to pop out of nowhere, like the eternal king of Jerusalem. There, this reference to Salem that has always kind of been, and he just pops up here and he goes away. For some scholars, they connect him. There is a Canaanite god named Zedek that was the head of a Canaanite deity, that his name meant righteousness, that was in this area. This may be a way of saying that those Canaanite gods serve the Most High God, and that is the God that Israel serves. It could be, and for me, I sort of lean into this way, Melchizedek is this picture connecting these, like Abraham and these early practices, to Second Temple Judaism, where they have priests and they tithe and they do things like that. Also, though, this is a really cool way. I think you can take this way too far, but Natalie, you might like this. So this, like, some people talk about Melchizedek as this like weird coexist thing. And what I do like, and I do take comfort and encouragement, that God is always working outside of where I am and where I am looking. And we see that here with Melchizedek. I know what's going on with Abraham and his family. I don't know everything that's going on with Melchizedek. But what I do know is that Melchizedek worshiped the God that I worship. And he maybe used some different language. He maybe looked a little bit different. He may have had some different practices. But he pops up and he meets Abraham. And Abraham recognizes it enough to give him 1/10 of all that he had gotten from that big war campaign. Melchizedek goes away. He tithes, yeah. It's enough that when we talk about David, who is this also king, ruler, and priest too, is in the order of Melchizedek. And when we talk about Jesus, Jesus is connected to Melchizedek. And that's the type of priestly class that we have too, is in that same way. We are not Aaronic priest. We don't serve in a temple, but we serve the eternal God, and we can go wherever we want and do those priestly things and represent God anywhere. And so our food for thought for this is the story of Melchizedek is just one example in Scripture that God is working in other places. More than just with Abraham and his family. I know God's working there, but God is working all around. And there are others in Scripture. This is just a good one. Never be surprised when God is working outside of where you're looking. God is working everywhere. This is just the one story of it through Abraham. Don't take that too far. Okay, don't take it too far. All right, let's go to chapter 15 with the covenant of pieces. or the covenant of cutting, if you want it to alliterate. Abraham struggling with childlessness. I like the humanity that we get to see with Abraham. He is not this just off their figure. He's like, hey, I want a kid, and I don't, and I'm sad. And he begins to question things. He is even thinking about, he has like a head servant in his house named Eliezer. He is thinking he needs to be the one, like he needs to officially adopt him to be the one of the covenant. And God takes him outside, look up at the stars, which if you can just close your eyes, think about going camping, or if you've been on a cruise, or if you're out in the desert or in the mountains, all of the stars that you see, not with the city stars that we see. God's like, look at all of those stars. That will be your inheritance. As numerous as the stars, as numerous as they are, that is all that you will bless if you keep walking on my line. That's you and me. We are like those stars in the sky. That was the promise. Abraham accepts that by faith. His stress is relieved. He takes a good night's sleep. And he has a weird dream. And so in this dream, God's going to enact this ancient ritual. This is a real thing. And we have the evidence of this too. That the way that they would enact covenants is by taking a bunch of animals, they would cut them in half, and they would lay them out from biggest to smallest. So like a big cow, and then I don't know what other ones it mentions, a lamb going down smaller and smaller until even you get to birds. And we look at that and we think, that's a weird way to do a covenant. But we do ceremonies that are wasteful for the point of being rememberable. Think about weddings. Like, people spend ridiculous and stupid amount of monies on weddings, and we do it because it's a big deal, and that's good to do. That's one thing that's happening here. You don't just waste animals that you eat. And so it's one way of commemorating this beginning of a new ceremony. Also, when two parties would walk through this ritual, it's, if I break this covenant, may I be as one of them. And here's the powerful thing about this covenant with Abraham and with God. Only God walks through the animals. Abraham doesn't do anything. God makes the promise of the covenant to Abraham, and there is nothing that Abraham can do to stop it or break it or change God's mind. It is this beautiful display of God's faithfulness to Israel and then therefore to us. I love it. I love it. There's nothing you can do to stop God from loving you and stop God from the work God's doing in the world. There's these mentions, and if you read this, you might be like, what's up with that? These smoking pots and the flame and all that. These were seen as wards to kind of break away evil spirits. So they were already seen as magical or divine, and God is just using the imagery that people would have known. And we call that a theophany. Theo means God, ophany, like optometrist, some way of seeing God. It's a picture of God. Okay, and here's a picture of what some of that might have looked like. So here's these animals cut in half, very bloody occasion. Nice and rememberable, weird fire, flame, and the pot and everything. But remember, there's nothing you can do to stop God from breaking the covenant. God is faithful. That's sort of what our theme for tonight is. No matter what Abraham's going to do, nothing is going to stop God's faithfulness. No matter what Israel is going to do, nothing can stop God's faithfulness. No matter what you do, nothing can stop God's faithfulness. And so, as a food for thought, just like in baptism, when God makes a promise and claims you as God's own, there is nothing that can stop that. This covenant of God making a family to bless the world is you. You are that blessing. I love this chapter. We don't talk about it enough. And I mean, wouldn't that be so cool when we did a baptism one day? We brought in a bunch of animals and ripped them in half and surrounded the baptismal font. And only God walks through it, not the one being baptized. I mean, it's really cool, right? Yeah. Think about that next time there's a baptism. Put some food dye in the fonts. Let that blood splash everywhere. Okay? All right, let's talk about Hagar and Ishmael. After another 10 years of waiting in Canaan, pay attention to the time frames here. Obviously, they're like, I'm kind of giving up hope. And so Sarah's like, hey, Abraham, I have this nice young servant over here. Why don't you go sleep with her and get her pregnant? And Abraham goes, okay. So I'm making a joke here. I don't want to make light of the abuse and sexual exploit that happens to Hagar here. So I want to acknowledge that. I shouldn't have made a joke, but this is a way of teaching that we are not as used to, where the heroes of the Bible are shown with their warts and their failures. And you look at this story and you go, that sounds like a bad idea. And it is a bad idea. And it's a way of showing you, don't do this, okay? Abraham and Sarah are not doing a good thing here. And Hagar is exploited. So this is teaching us about unideal relationships.
Alexander,
Yeah.
isn't he diluting his bloodline by doing that? I thought they wanted to marry their cousins so that they kept their bloodline. This is diluting it.
So Hagar was not married to Abraham.
Yeah, but it's her.
Yeah, but she doesn't matter because she's a slave. So it would have served as a surrogate.
The child conceived would be her bloodline. So he went out. I thought they married their cousins to keep the same bloodline.
Well, so the bloodline, but in the inheritance in the family tree. It doesn't have to do with genetics. It has to do with the family inheritance.
Oh, they didn't care about genetics.
Yeah. They didn't have genes yet. No chromosomes. What I love about this part is we see this new phrase for God. And this scene for me is very comforting, it's very powerful. If you're lost, you feel alone, you can quote this prayer from Hagar, the God who sees me, the God who hears me. It's really cool stuff. Hagar is out in the wilderness, she's alone, she's just been abused. I mean, she was essentially just raped, and then she's been physically abused by Sarah. She runs, she's all alone, doesn't know what to do. God reaches out to her, this nobody that no one cared about. For some reason, we still talk about her and her name, the God who sees me, because he heard her cry. Really powerful stuff. She ends up going back to Abraham because God reaches out to her. Ishmael is going to be born. And I love this icon here. The God that has heard, the God who sees. I love this. God sees those who cry. God sees those who grieve. God sees those who are in hardships. And so, while for me, we said some scholars point to this as the center of the story, I can see why they do, because of the picture of God's mercy here. I mean, it's a very powerful story. I wish we had more time to talk about it, but we don't, so we're going to keep on moving. But God sees and hears the cries of the needy. Even when we're at our loneliness, God is still there, listening and watching over us. Hold on to that. It's powerful. We serve an awesome God. Here we are in our covenants. We're right between this covenant of cutting, the covenant of pieces, and we're going to go into circumcision. And just remember, circumcision is a sign of the covenant that happens there. And so just like baptism is our sign of covenant, picture blood splashing when you see the water next time. Picture those animals, because it's this great promise of God, and we see that displayed there with Hagar again, this God of care and love.
So is this the first time circumcision was done?
Not in the world,
No.
but it's when it gets adopted here as a sign. Same thing with baptism. Baptism is not a Christian thing. It was done throughout the world, and just John the Baptist, there in Second Temple Judaism, there was a lot of groups that did baptisms, like water immersion and things like that. People like to cut stuff. They're weird, So 13 years later, God is going to formalize this covenant by a shifting of their names. Abram means great father. And I tried last night to keep saying Abram when it was Abram and Abraham when it was Abraham. I gave up today because it was hard. And he's changed to Abraham, which is the greater father, or the greatest father, the father of many nations is how we translate it. Sarah means princess or queen. It's royalty. They're the head of a nation. And that's what their name change represents. And we talked about when we began how their names are like titles here, showing kind of who they are. Every male in the house is going to get circumcised. And this is going to be a sign of the covenant from generation to generation. This is one reason why we call it cutting a covenant. Cutting the animals, and here cutting of the flesh is a pretty normal thing. And God listens to Abraham's prayer too. Abraham still wants Ishmael to be blessed, and he prays for him, and he makes sure Ishmael is. Pretty cool stuff. I'm like 4 minutes behind the schedule I wanted to be. So let me ask you all, I have this video about covenants that's 5 minutes long. I really want to play it for you. And we can kind of try to go through it a little quicker or some of the other stuff, if that's okay. Yeah.
Heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much. And that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Right, and this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as his partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just one or two humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and he makes a new partnership with them called a covenant. And in a covenant, God makes promises, and then in exchange asks his partner to fulfill certain commitments. And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew his partnership with everybody else.
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption, and Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again. Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though he knows humans won't be.
The next time we see God make a covenant is with a man named Abraham. God chooses him, promises to bless him, give him a large family, lots of land where they can flourish.
And in return, God asks Abraham to trust him and train up his family to do what is right and just. And the whole reason for this covenant is God says that somehow he's going to bring his blessing to all families of the world through this one family.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners. And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
That's the covenant with Israel. The last covenant is with King David.
Yeah, the tribe of Israel has become this large nation ruled by David. And God asked David and his descendants to partner with him by leading Israel in obeying the laws and doing what is right and just. And God promises that one day, one of David's sons will come and extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations.
So those are the 4 covenants that God makes in order to restore his partnership with the whole world.
But here's what happens. Israel breaks the covenant. They worship other gods, they allow horrible injustice, and so they lose their land and are forced off into exile.
So it seems hopeless. But during this time, Israel's prophets talked about a day when God would restore these covenants in spite of Israel's failure, somehow.
Yeah, they called it the New Covenant. And this is actually what's so interesting about Jesus, is that he's introduced into this story as the one who fulfills all of these covenant relationships. We're told that he's from the family of Abraham, and so he will bring the blessings of that family to the whole world. We're told that he's the faithful Israelite who was able to truly obey the law. And we're told that he's the king from the line of David. And so he goes about extending God's kingdom of justice and peace to all.
And that's really remarkable for one guy.
Yeah, and what it highlights is perhaps the most surprising claim of all made about this man, that Jesus is no mere human, but rather God become human. And God did this in order to be that faithful covenant partner that we are all made to be, but have failed to be. And so through Jesus, God has opened up a way for anyone to be in a renewed partnership with him.
So Jesus calls people to follow him and become part of this new covenant family.
And despite their failures, Jesus is committed to making them into partners who are becoming more and more faithful.
The story of the Bible ends with a vision of a fully renewed world, full of goodness and peace.
And there's this renewed humanity there, partnering together with God to expand the goodness of his creation. And so the end of the Bible story is really a new beginning.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, covenants are awesome. We're going to do our speed run, so buckle up. Okay, chapter 18, there's a son promised to Abraham and Sarah. I want to just make note that first it says Yahweh approaches Abraham, and then the three visitors approach Abraham. So that could be all three at once, or like happening at the same time, or like Yahweh talked to Abraham, said these three guys are going to pop up, and that was three actual people. But they seem to be these like angelic beings that are representing God. And Sarah's going to laugh because she's like, ha ha ha, I'm like 100. How the heck am I going to have a kid? And it's kind of cool. Isaac's name means it means laughter. And so, but it's instead of a representation of Sarah's unbelief, it's a representation of joy. And then Abraham is going to go through all these rituals with the three visitors that are good hospitality. And so just make note of that. He's like, stay here. Come on, please, let me feed you. Take off your shoes, stay here. And you've probably seen me talk about that Trinity icon. It's based after this story with Abraham and the three visitors representing the three persons of the Trinity. There are also some who say that this might mirror this Canaanite epic of Eklat, which is about this guy that this one new to you. It's a little lesser known, yeah. It's a Ugaritic tale, but it's about this childless guy who goes to serve this god, and through hospitality, a child comes, but that kid dies. Which is a sad end to that tale. What we see with Abraham, it mirrors, even some of the language that happens is the same. But remember when Isaac almost dies up on that mountain? Isaac doesn't die. God provides a way. And so that's kind of cool. I don't want to lean too far into it, but just so you know, there's some cool things going on there. And then there's this judgment that's going to happen on Sodom. And the summary story is God's like, look, Sodom is horrible. I'm going to have to wipe it out. Abraham's like, no, Lot's there. Wait, God, please be merciful. And God keeps listening to Abraham. And he gets smaller and smaller and smaller until he's like, what if there's just 10 righteous people? And God's like, if there's 10 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. But there's not. And we'll see what happens in the city in a second. And that 10 is significant. That's the smallest judicial number. You can't get any smaller. It's not that Abraham didn't know how to count to 1. It's that 10 was the smallest number you could get to. And so never doubt having a conversation with God. Then we'll see what happens in chapter 19. You might be a little familiar with this story. These two angel visitors come in to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they come to get Lot. And Lot's like, hey, welcome into my house. And then all of the men in the city come at night, and they want to gang rape these two visitors, which is not good hospitality. And there's this picture of being hospitable and not being hospitable. Notice the difference. And this is very similar to a story in Judges 19:21 with Gibeah. Genesis is written later, and so there's some connections there with that story of Judges. Gibeah is a tribe of Benjamin. And so the angels end up dragging Lot and his family out, but the son-in-laws are like, nah, we're going to stay back. They're probably joking. How can the city get destroyed? And it does. And then Lot's wife looks back, and she gets turned into a pillar of salt, which I feel like was always a threat from the pastor in the church I grew up in about women or something like that. Here's Lot's wife right there. That's a real pillar right there with some salt deposits there near the Dead Sea. You can go see that. you could go get a selfie with Lot's wife right there. It might be that this was an old folk tale. That was an old story because this pillar's been there for a while. And there's some other stories about how it got there too. Then there's this weird scene, and if you read it, you went, what? Where Lot's daughters, it's only Lot, his two daughters in the cave, and they get him just super drunk 2 days in a row and sleep with him and get pregnant. And you're like, that sounds horrible. It's supposed to sound horrible. And for this, it's a way of storytelling to talk about Israel's neighbors. They become the head of the Moabites and the Ammonites. And it's a way of saying that the Moabites and the Ammonites are not good people because they came from this. Does that sort of make sense? It's a way of making fun of their ancestors and like they came from incest, we came from God's anointed, sort of thing. So a little bit of casual racism going on there. Here's where we are. We're seeing human failures. We just saw the other failure at Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to go to the another sister wife deception. We'll kind of go through it quick. But Abraham gets afraid again. You would think he's kind of trusting God by now. But now he's in a Philistine city of Gerar, and he meets Abimelech. And Abimelech takes Sarah into his household. Kind of the way it reads like, it's like everyone gets an STI, essentially, or an STD, and everyone gets sick. And they're like, what is going on? Well, Abimelech has this dream where it says, there's a prophet among you, and you have dishonored the prophet. And so Abimelech goes to Abraham. It's like, dude, not cool, man. And so Abraham prays for him, and the curse is lifted. And thankfully, Abimelech did not, he keeps being prevented from, actually sleeping with Sarah. But here in this story, so it's a repeated story, but just note again, Abraham's not really seen in a good light, and Abimelech is, which is going to lead to later, Israel makes a covenant with Abimelech. And they have relations with this city, and so it's helping give a precursor to that relationship. He was a good guy, and that's why we can have a treaty with him. And just note, too, that Abraham is serving in all these different functions throughout. So he was just a guy in the city that traveled out of faith, but then he becomes a war leader. Then he becomes like a king. Now he's serving like a prophet. And so we're seeing him take on all of these different roles. Chapter 21, Isaac's going to be born. His name is Laugh. It's a picture of joy now. And unfortunately, Ishmael is going to be cast out because there is tensions that continue on with Sarah and with Ishmael. We've skipped like 13 years just here in this chapter. And Abraham still wants a blessing to be there for Ishmael. And so Sarah is mean, but Abraham seems to love Ishmael. And if you are familiar with the relations between Ishmael's descendants and Abraham's descendants, you'll see how that continued to cause tensions, which is again another way of teaching about don't have kids with other women. Abraham and Abimelech end up having this dispute over a well, so they make a covenant. And it's either the well of seven or the well of oath. I like the interpretation that it's the well of oath. And there, Abraham is going to end up making a sacrifice to the everlasting God, which is kind of cool. And this is where we are on the map. So Abraham's been going all around through here. He was at Salem. We haven't been here, but at Mamre was the three visitors, at Hebron. Now he's over here in Gerar, so you can see where they're just traveling all around. And next we're going to look at the binding of Isaac, which is a weird story, right? I want to just take a moment, take a deep breath with me. Okay, this story is not saying God wants you to sacrifice your children or your grandchildren or your neighbor's children when they're loud and annoying, even though you might want to. The point of this story is that God doesn't do that. That's the point of this story, and we're seeing a difference about God. Okay, hold on to that. Okay, God is going to do another test with Abraham with this command to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah. Really cool, because the Temple Mound gets built on this same mountain. And as the story would go, and in particular in the Gospel of John, it's like Jesus was like the same spot where Isaac was, is what the allusion is, was on the same one. It's the place where substitution happened, where someone else died in someone else's place. Here it's a lamb. Jesus is the Lamb of God. Now, while they're going up this mountain, Isaac is old enough. He's at least 14 at this point. He is old enough to know how sacrifices work, know what's going on. Abraham's old, so Isaac's carrying the wood. And as they're going up the mountain, he's like, hey, Dad, where's the offering? And notice the line that Abraham says, and this for me is a key detail. Abraham says, God will provide a lamb. It's not just God will provide any sacrifice. Abraham has faith that there will be a lamb sacrificed. Okay? And I want to hold on to that because to me that's a key detail. Abraham doesn't really think Isaac is going to be dead here. There's also really intimate language that gets used here. I like this story a lot, where this is your one and your only and the promised and the beloved son. And there's this intimacy there, this kind of last sense of hope. And so while Abraham is swinging the knife down, which seems really last minute to me, this voice cries out, wait, Abraham. And there in the thicket is a ram, which is a type of lamb that's caught. It just has its horns. And they make sacrifice with that. Now, a lot of questions people ask when they read this story is like, why didn't Isaac do anything? Did it hurt their relationship? I think Isaac was a good guy. I think they stayed in good relations. I don't think there's textual evidence that this caused a relationship dispute, nor do I think that's the point of the story. The point of the story is introducing the sacrificial system, where for all of Israel, once a year, at the same mountain, at the temple, one lamb would be sacrificed. One lamb would be set free, the scapegoat. And it would have the blood scattered on it, and that showed how all of Israel was forgiven once a year. It's a picture of that story. Okay. Also, it is showing how God does not sacrifice children, nor will accept the sacrifice of children. Again, it's a picture of the sacrificial system in the temple. Does that make sense there?
Well,
It's a weird story. It's weird. Okay. Don't sacrifice your kids.
he believed he wasn't going to, but then obviously he had to change his mind pretty quickly because he bound up.
Well, yes, but he
And
had
started
faith
killing.
that Isaac would live and that God would do something. But he was still obedient, which is also a picture that despite Abraham's failures, he trusted and did what God said. Go leave your family and move across the world. Okay, I'll do it. I don't get it. I feel like that right now, moving to Texas. I don't want to do it, but I'm trying to. Now, I would probably stop if it was something with my kids, but it's a picture of his obedience. And primarily, it's a lesson about sacrifice. Don't do it, though. Don't do it. Don't tie up your kids. Don't do this.
Isaac was obedient, and so was Abraham.
Yes, and yeah, again, to me, I see Isaac as being obedient, too. Isaac knew what was up. You don't tie up a 14-year-old.
I always thought he was younger, like 3 or 4.
No, he's older. He's older, and he carries the wood. Because in the scene before, it's been 13 years since Ishmael's birth, and he was circumcised at 1 year old. 13 years later, Ishmael gets sent away, and then this happens. There's the genealogy, which, here's the picture. You have it, but just note that Rebekah is born, and she's going to marry Isaac. And we'll talk about that next week, about how that happens. Here she is. So here's Rebekah. She marries Isaac. They're a pretty good couple. Of all the couples here, they've got a pretty solid thing going for the most part.
Who was Rebekah's father?
Looks like it's Bethuel right here, who's from Nahor, who is Abraham's brother. Now, then we're going to see the death of Sarah, which is sad. And she's 127. And we'll shorten the exchange that happens here. There's a legal conversation that goes back and forth where they keep trying to one-up each other. Abraham goes to the cave at Mechpah, and he is with the Hittites. And he wants to purchase a cave for his wife, for her to live in. And the Hittites are like, oh, well, let me gift it to you. No, I'll buy it. We'll do this. No. And we're making sure that it's legally done correctly. This all is following, like lawyers would love this chapter. It's very legally detailed. He pays 400 shekels, which is not that they came to a good agreement. It's that the Hittites made him pay a king's ransom. It's a ridiculous, ridiculous price. It is years worth of money to purchase this cave. And what this is going to do, and this is going to set up, is a legal precedent to have access to the land. And this is very important. We see this happen in other Canaanite texts and stuff too. Before you would go through and make conquest, if you could provide a legal right to the land, that your ancestors were there, it was very important to the people for where they were coming in. We see that kind of conversation still happening today. And so that's what's happening here. And it's going to make way for when the conquest happens later and when Israel's coming back out of exile to say, we belong here, our ancestors belong here. And we didn't just like purchase it like a normal guy. You ripped us off. And so we have even more rights to the land. We purchased the whole land, not just a cave. That is some of the conversation that happens here.
That picture, Alexander, what is it we're seeing?
Yeah, this is, you can go visit Sarah's tomb today. So there it is. And that box there is called a bone box. And so a bone box, they would let people, so like when Jesus goes in the tomb, that in their family tombs, they wouldn't stay there forever. They would go in a tomb for about a year for a period of mourning while the body decomposes. And then after that period of mourning, people would like take off their black robes, and you'd have left as wide as their hip and as long as their femur, and everyone gets their custom-made bone box. And I've seen Alexander's bone box, and it's the only Alexander in the Bible. He's in the book of Acts. I saw it in D.C., and that was pretty cool.
Where was it? Or is it?
It was in D.C., but it was on loan from... is there a Museum of London in Alexandria, Egypt? Something, I don't know, it was something related like that. But that's her bone box. You can go see her tomb there.
Is that the tomb, the building?
Yeah.
I mean, is where we go, visitor center for Sarah's tomb.
Yeah, yeah, you can see it. If you look up Sarah's tomb,
Who else
you
is
could go
in
there.
Is it just her or?
Maybe some Hittites. I'm not really sure. I've not been there. And I've had that picture in my collection for a few years, so I don't remember all the details of it. But this is the story of Abraham. So again, for me, the central point, walking by God with faith and covenant. I know we ran through his story, but there's this idea of 3 covenants. There is these ideas of 3 failures. And we won't do this as a discussion, but just a food for thought. Think about this. Biblical heroes are seen with great faithfulness and great failures. Abraham is seen, he is showing great faith, leaving his country, the scenes with Isaac, and his great failures. He lies about his wife, he uses women, he does other things, but like, how does that influence the way that like you see God using you? Like we think about these great heroes of the Bible as being perfect and awesome, and they do great things, but they do bad things too. And I'll just revisit David. David was all of the things that are the worst. He was a rapist, he was a murderer, he was an adulteress, he did other insane things, and yet he was called a man after God's own heart, which I read about David and I get, but when I see someone else and I think you abuse women or you hurt people or you have your faults, I don't like you and I have trouble forgiving you. And when I do bad stuff, I'm even worse at forgiving myself. But that's not how God sees us. And so the takeaway for today, remember covenant. Remember there's nothing you can do to stop God from loving you, and it's about God's faithfulness despite our failures, and that you are a blessing to the world. The Lord be with you. My God, we thank you for Abraham, and in particular, we thank you for your faithfulness. Amen. Next week, we will do the story of Isaac and Jacob. And then the last week, we will do the sons of Israel, and I'm hoping to let you know in an email next week that we will do something special that day too. That will be our last day. It will be sad, and I might cry.
Yeah.
gonna
small
crank
bag
through
of
that.
clothes and some new stuff that doesn't fit. I could take that to Home or Goodwill or any number of places, but I just had a hard time giving it to Sarah. And she said,